All right, for the sake of this recording, welcome everyone to the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts Project Grant for Organizations Workshop and Application Walkthrough. This recording is for the October 3rd, 2023 deadline. So second, just talk about RISCA. We are a state agency similar to the Department of Health, the Department of Education. We're effectively the state's Department of Arts and Culture. We're supported by appropriations both from the Rhode Island General Assembly, as well as funds from the National Endowment for the Arts, a federal agency. We grant out a mix of state and federal funds, which I'll get into the implications of that a little bit later on. As an agency, we're charged with stewarding the arts and culture ecosystem and being a convener and connector of arts and culture communities. About a third of what we do as staff people is manage grant programs. That's how many people know us. But we also do a lot of meeting connecting work. We develop programs for the subsector of the ecosystem to reach charged with stewarding. And then we also do a lot of policy work, both within state government, nationally, and within just Rhode Island communities as well. This is me. Again, Todd Trebor. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm the acting deputy director at RISCA. I'm also our 504 accessibility coordinator. Every state agency is required by the federal government, excuse me one second, to have a 504 accessibility coordinator. We're charged with ensuring that internally staff is up to date on access, knowledge, and how one can provide accommodations for people and communities with disabilities. We're also externally a point of an information resource for you all as well. So if you have questions about access for people with disabilities, you can absolutely reach out to me at any point in time. If I don't know the answer, since I'm new to the role and it's one of the many hats I wear, I know how to get the answer and I can help you with that as well. So I'm starting with this in case people drop off because they're busy, whatever. This is my one big piece of grant writing advice I give to everyone, and it comes from my grant writing instructors from 10 or 12 years ago, Mario Gardule and Randy Vega. One of the tricky things about writing grants for RISCA is that, as you are all aware, if you've attended the regular grant workshop, all our grant decisions are done by panels. And panels are comprised of people just like you, people who have an interest in arts and culture. They might work at an arts and culture organization. They might be an artist or culture bearer. They might be a parent of a young person that takes dance classes. So everyone believes that arts and culture is important and vital to our well-being and our communities who is on a panel. But they all have different personalities, and we assemble panels, like I said, every cycle, and they vary. So you don't know who your audience is, and that can be tricky, other than what I just said, that they're interested in arts and culture. My instructors years ago told me that there are 3 panelist archetypes to think about: a head person, a heart person, and a numbers person. A head person in the panel room is someone who is looking at a project and being like, okay, is this coherent and logical? Does the timeline make sense? Are they thinking through all the logistical details? They're looking at that and seeing if it's in a proposal to understand if you actually know what you're doing, right? Or know how to do what you're proposing. The head person is also interested in hearing, in some instances, how a project might link to bigger picture societal issues as well. So bringing in data can be helpful if relevant to a project. You know, if you're doing a project that has an arts and education focus to it in some way, the ways in which arts education or arts and education can be helpful to a student's performance or well-being is something you might bring up, things of that nature. A heart person is someone who is compelled by videos, images, particularly of people engaging with arts and culture work in some way. They're also interested in hearing things in the perspective of, from the perspective of people outside the applicant. So having testimonials from individuals who have participated in the program that you have done as a support material, which I'll talk about that later on, video of people, etc. But again, thinking about things being in the voice of are involved with the project, right? What I often see is grant applications that the narrative's done and there's very little support materials, and those support materials are primarily a CV or a resume, and that can be very dry for a hard person, right? And then lastly, a numbers person. This is not just someone who looks at a budget, but it's someone who is understands something better when numbers are a part of the storytelling. So for instance, I've seen some project summaries for proposals that are very vague in terms of what's happening. Often it talks about why something is happening, which is important. But for instance, it might be we're doing a project for our community to improve their access to arts education. A better project summary that incorporates numbers that can be helpful is we're doing 4 workshops between January and May of 2024 for up to 20 people in our community to experience arts and education, right? So think about numbers of people participating, how many sessions, things of that nature. That helps a numbers person. Again, these are archetypes. We're all a little bit of each, right? Some of us are more one than the other. But if you learn nothing else today, just keep that in mind, because with any kind of writing, audience is important. And again, the challenge here is the audience changes and varies every cycle. So going into the project grants for organizations itself. So the project grants for organizations, one moment, provides grants of up to $3,000 in support of arts and culture projects that are relevant and meaningful to a Rhode Island community or communities. This is our entry-level program for organizations. It's designed in such a way because we know many people, this is their first time writing a grant and might be the only grant opportunity they regularly apply to, since there's so few arts and culture grants provided in Rhode Island. This application and this program was reevaluated and restructured in, I believe, 2021 by a 10-person working group of people in the community, specifically people associated with volunteer-led organizations and organizations with budgets under $100,000 a year. And they help determine the evaluation criteria and related to our strategic plan and the questions that we ask as well. You'll see that the application is lengthy in terms of how we ask the questions in particular. They erred on the side of being very specific in how we ask the questions. So one of my pieces of advice to you all is going to be answer the questions in the application directly and answer them in order that they're asked, including the sub-questions. You'll see that when we walk through the application in a moment. As I just said, there's application support both within the application itself. You're going to see links to things within the application that'll open, that'll provide you more information so you can better answer questions. I advise you all to look at those. And then we also regular grant workshops, one-on-one meetings, and drop-in office hours. I'm in a little bit of a wild moment this fall. We are down 2 staff people, and I am both the acting deputy director and the organization's program director. So I will send out my sign-up link to chat with me when I send up this recording. Unfortunately, there are very few times this fall for me to do that. Typically, I'd like to have opportunities to review grant drafts the week before a deadline. That's not going to happen this fall, but that's something that will happen again in the spring once we're fully staffed and things have kind of stabilized again at the agency. So 2 deadlines for this program in a year, April 1st and October 1st, unless the first falls on a weekend day, as it has this year. In this case, October 2nd is the deadline. April 1st deadline supports projects happening between January 1st and June 30th of the upcoming July 1st and the following June 30th. So the entirety of the state's upcoming fiscal year. The October deadline supports projects occurring between January 1st and June 30th. So for this deadline supports projects happening between January 1st of 2024 and June 30th of 2024. If you want to do a project that's happening after June 30th of 2024, or the majority of the activities are happening after June 30th of 2024, you'll want to apply at our April deadline in 2024. So types of projects that are funded. This is kind of, I say this and my colleagues are like, what do you think? This is kind of like the catch-all, I usually say like wastebasket program because it can capture a lot of things, but like a really broad program, a catch-all program. The parameters of it are intentionally broad. We have relatively few grant programs as a state arts agency because we're a small state, and this one can do a lot of duty here. We have it broad so it can be as responsive as possible to what communities want or need over time. So here are some hypothetical programs that PGO will fund, some of which it has funded. One big example is 3 day-long summer cultural festivals, or just festivals in general. Example one you can see there is a free day-long summer cultural festival at a public park featuring live performances, including Rhode Island-based performing artists. I frequently get the question as to whether or not a project can support artists coming from out of state to do something. The answer to that is yes, it can. However, it is typically seen amongst the panel that projects that have at least some Rhode Island artists involved, if not exclusively Rhode Island artists, are more competitive. Panels have often, again, composition varies, but they've often been impressed when there's projects that kind of have a mixture of the two so that there can be nationwide connection building, and particularly when you're thinking about artists that might be younger in Rhode Island or have less experience, intermingling with artists from outside the state that have more experience. Example two, a free series of art classes led by a teaching artist at a social service nonprofit for a dozen adults with developmental disabilities. Just pointing out the free piece here, projects don't have to be free to be funded by RISCA, but one thing to consider is their cost and how that makes them accessible or not accessible. What I typically advise applicants that if you're charging for a program, that's fine. People often do things like sliding scale, et cetera. Consider the cost of the movie ticket as a good guide as to what is considered accessible typically amongst the panel. If you wouldn't mind putting yourselves on mute, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. You will have time to ask questions for sure. Example three, a low-cost dance program for 8 young people within a specific cultural community, taught by artists or culture bearers from that specific cultural tradition. The intention of the program is to preserve and perpetuate these cultural traditions among future generations. So you can see 3 very different types of projects, right? Example two, any nonprofit can apply for our project grant, as long as they're doing an arts and culture project. That's the most critical thing, not the identity of the nonprofit itself. Again, you can see funding things with thousands of people attending, funding things with just a few people attending. Both breadth and depth are valid and seen as impactful by the state arts agency and by panels themselves. All right, who is eligible to apply? Again, as I said, any nonprofit organization that is based in Rhode Island is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. A organization can apply if they're not a nonprofit, as long as they have a Rhode Island-based nonprofit as a fiscal sponsor. Again, when I say any nonprofit, that includes also organizations that are applying for or receiving funding from RISCA already. So many of our general operating support organizations, which are many larger budget arts and culture organizations, can be approached and asked if they would be a fiscal sponsor for a project. There are many of them that are open to that. An organization can fiscally sponsor multiple projects at a deadline, and they can also apply to the same grant program if they're eligible at the same deadline. I've had people use churches as their fiscal sponsor. I've had them use libraries. I've had them use, again, social service nonprofits as well. What I usually advise is, rather than asking me to recommend a fiscal sponsor, are there nonprofits that you have a relationship with? And again, it doesn't matter what their ilk is, just that they're a nonprofit. That's usually the best way to go. It is fine for a fiscal sponsor to ask for an administrative fee, and you can write that into the grant. There's no real hard rule on that. I typically see administrative fees between 0 and 10% of the budget request, and that seems to me to be pretty, typically pretty reasonable. Other things to know, and these are things I'm going to breeze through because they're part of our typical grant workshop, so we can get to the meat of the application and other things. Panel representation requirements. So as mentioned, all our grant decisions are done by panels of Rhode Island residents for this program. We consider diversity in its many different iterations or forms, I should say, when we assemble our panels: race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation or identity, arts and culture experience and relationship to arts and culture. So again, like I said, working at an organization, being an artist, being the parent of someone who takes art classes. I think I said age, but that's definitely one too. We also think about what arts and culture experience our panelists have the most comfort with. So one thing to know, always, 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 is you can't expect that people are going to know deep in your particular art or cultural form. They're going to have a general awareness, and you'll see how this application is structured. It it allows for someone with generalist knowledge to be a functional panelist. And this program is really about how a program is relevant to a community and how the people doing the program are relevant to a community. But I always try to have a mix there, visual art, dance, writing, theater. Again, I don't hit all the things, but I hit a lot of them in there. And I also, just so you all are aware, try to have 2 people who are more experienced panelists and 2 people who are totally new to it. So we get some fresh perspective and we get some experience in there because that makes for exciting conversations and helps the newer people get more acclimated to a process that can feel intimidating. Along with our agency values, at least 2 individuals on a panel have to be people who identify as BIPOC. Partial awards are very common in this program. This is the one grant program that we have that has the largest statewide reach. And we're obligated as a state funder to fund in every legislative district in as much as possible. We also have way more applications than we have funding, unfortunately. Hopefully that will change. Please talk to your legislators. It's you all who can help make that happen. But the thing with partial awards to know is I'm not involved in grant making decisions at all. I facilitate, I take notes, I can answer informational questions. When it comes to funding recommendations, panel do those themselves with money they have allocated for the panel decision making. I don't like to see them give awards of less than $1,000 unless someone requests less than $1,000. And if they're going to give a partial award, I tell them that we have to look back at the project budget and ensure that we're giving an award that's significant enough for the project to still happen in some way, shape, or form. Only 1 application is allowed per grant deadline. So if you're interested in applying for a project grant for organizations and a project grant in education, you have to choose one or the other. You can't do both. General operating support organizations receiving general operating support for organizations are not eligible to apply for project grants as well. Again, statewide funder, we can't be cutting multiple checks to the same organization. As you can imagine, the optics of that on the back end. The one caveat is that, again, general operating support organizations or any nonprofit can be a fiscal sponsor as well as applying for a grant. We're clear when we report to the legislature that distinction so they understand that. If you receive a grant from RISCA, you must credit RISCA on all marketing materials. This is really important, okay, because it's the way that the legislature, again, understands that we're funding statewide. All RISCA funds are contingent upon availability of the funds. That's just our caveat in there in case things go wild with the NEA or the state's budget. Grant applications are considered on a competitive basis. For the October deadline, you will be notified as to whether or not you received an award the week prior to Christmas, so sometime around December 20th. If you need any accommodations, meaning if you are a person with a disability or English is not your native language or your first language, reach out to me and let me know. Please give me about 2 weeks notice and I can support you in the application process or connect you with resources that will support you in the application process. Payments can take 8 to 12 weeks after you sign the grant contract. Again, if you get notification on December 20th, you got an award, yes, you sign it. You also need to do something called registering with Ocean State Procurers, which is the payment entity within the state government. We do not do payments other than saying, yes, pay them. And payments have been taking anywhere up to 3 months. So just be prepared for that, both for yourself and any artist that you're employing as well. And as with anything supported by federal and state funds, all projects must occur in ADA compliant spaces. The shorthand for that is wheelchair accessible spaces, although it can mean much more than that. Okay, starting your application, things to gather. We're gonna have a pause for questions in just a little bit. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but again, you'll get this recording later on. So you're gonna need a 501c3 determination letter. This is a letter that comes from the federal government saying, yes, you are a nonprofit. If you're using a fiscal sponsor, you wanna get this from them. A SAM UEI. So the federal government requires that we as a state agency granting out federal funds or a mix of state and federal funds, grant it only to entities that have this 12-character unique entity identifier. I don't really totally understand why, but basically it's just something they require, you gotta get it. If you don't have one, you need to go now to sam.gov. You don't need to pay anything. There's all these SAMI website things, ignore them. You just need to get that number. You don't need to do any elevated levels of registration beyond receiving that number. Once you get it, you will have to re-register annually. But again, these processes are all free. If for some reason you do not have a SAM-UEI number by the grant deadline, you should reach out to me and let me know, and I will tell you what to do. There'll be a way for you to submit your application. However, we will still need a SAM-UEI prior to the applications moving to panel discussion. So that'll buy you a few weeks of time. I'll reach out to you if you still don't have your SAM-UEI by the time the panel meets. I'll have to pull your application. But what's happened is, even for those, this can take a couple of days, particularly now that the process has got its legs under it. When it was rolled out in 2022, was a total nightmare for a lot of people. But this buys you a few weeks, and usually people are able to get their SAM-UEI numbers on time by then, 95% of the time. You want a recent 990 from one of the past 3 fiscal years, again, either from yourself as a nonprofit or from your fiscal sponsor. If you're a new nonprofit, what you will do is upload a letter, a Word document, not even a letter, just a Word document that says, we were incorporated recently, therefore we don't have a 990, if you were incorporated this year. 990 is just the tax returns that nonprofits file. They're the equivalent of what we file as individuals, but for nonprofits. A letter from a fiscal sponsor, if applicable. This can be found both within the application. There's a template. Also on the website for this grant program, you can find a template letter as well to submit. This outlines the relationship between you and the fiscal sponsor, and that they're taking financial and fiscal responsibility for the grant. If you use a fiscal sponsor, what will happen is they will receive the grant check, because we can only grant out to nonprofits that are federally recognized, and then they'll cut a check or checks to you. Other things to gather, we're going to see this really prominently when we talk about evaluation criteria and we talk about when we get into the application itself. Support materials are the most important thing to start with. People understandably get really caught up in the narrative, and that's important. But know that we also orient our panelists through an anti-bias training and implicit bias training to not be so caught up in how something is written, but to look at what the core elements of a program are. If it's clear what it is, it's clear an applicant understands how to do what they're doing, etc., versus how it's written. Support materials are a way to show how a project is meaningful to your community. So there's going to be 2 kinds you'll submit. Ones that relate to your community and ones that relate to the artists or culture bearers involved in the project. So the community support materials might be letters from valued partners or people in the community. They might be a document of quotes from current participants in a project, or anything else from people outside your organization that speaks to why this project is important to the people being engaged. I've had people submit emails or screenshots from social media. I've had them just put quotes in a document and anonymize who they're from. Sometimes I've had people, when they cannot anonymize them, put pictures or just put the first name of someone. All good, right? All those things are acceptable. They're in the voice of people outside the organization. And then materials for the artists or culture bearers involved. Typical resume CVs, images are great. Also, images can be a part of support materials from your community, seeing people excited about the work that's happening. Can be from a prior project. If this is a new project, that's fine. Can also be video. That's something that really speaks to that heart person, right? Seeing that interaction that can enliven what can be a drier grant narrative. Okay, we're going to go through the evaluation criteria here. A lot here. We'll just kind of, walk through it here. So the community impact and engagement is 60% of the score for this program. And kind of the main guiding question for you to ask yourself, is there evidence, and this is what the panel has asked, is there evidence that this arts and culture project meaningfully engages and inspires the community while expanding opportunities and access for Rhode Island residents? So they're looking at the degree to which an applicant has a complete and thorough understanding of their project's intended community, supported by demographic details if available, and other data and information. And that can look a lot of different ways. I'll talk about it when we get to that question in the application. Does the project have the project has a direct and deep relevance to the creative experience and or cultural heritage of the identified community? Again, this can be communicated in the narrative. This can also be communicated in support materials from community members, right? The project engages Rhode Island's residents in under-resourced geographic communities and or historically and continuously marginalized populations. such as immigrant groups, Black, Indigenous, or people of color communities, rural populations, aging populations, people living in poverty, people experiencing houselessness, people with disabilities, incarcerated populations, communities recovering from trauma or disaster, and military service members and veterans. We're granting out public funds, right? So this is a priority for all public funds, particularly from federal funds as well. These identified groups are identified priority groups by the National Endowment for the Arts. Two other things with community impact and engagement, again, it's 60% of the score. Clear and specific actions that indicate the project will be accessible and inclusive and reduce barriers to access for those who want to attend or participate in the project. We're going to look at this question in the application, but I'm going to say this now too. You need to think beyond something being in an ADA compliant space. I see applicants, about 50% of them, if not more, answer a question about the way in which they're providing access. We indicate in the question, beyond being in an ADA compliant space, that's a requirement. What else are you doing? So you need to think beyond that. There's a link in that question to ideas, but consider things like economic access, physical access. Consider the format in which you're doing something and how that fits people's schedules. Are you providing childcare? Are you, is it on a bus route, et cetera? Access can look a lot of different ways. And access and equity are deeply intertwined, if not the same thing. I just was at the LEAD Access Conference for Arts and Disability, and we typically talk about disability equity versus access because it is equity, right, as a form of equity, 1000%. And lastly, community support materials come from a varied array of community sectors, both arts and non-arts, and reflect a robust support for the project. 40% of your score, the remaining 40%, is feasibility and likelihood of success. This is where the head and numbers people are like, yes. So is there evidence that the applicant has considered all the factors necessary for the product to be a success? So is the application clearly and thoroughly stating specifically what will be done, when and where things will take place, and why the project should be supported by public funds? Again, the where, when, where, what, where, when, how, what, where, when, how, you know what I'm saying? That's all really important to hit when you are writing this, okay? Because I get things that are really well-intentioned, have a great sense of why they're happening, but are just vague on things. One thing to remember and understand is, and I have had applicants get tripped up on this, understandably, you're typically writing an application for a program that's happening 3, 6, 9 months from when you're submitting the application. And what happens is sometimes people feel like they're lying if they kind of project certain things. You're not lying, all right? You're considering a future reality, right? And you're being like, this is a reality that's gonna happen. It's understood that things might change slightly when the rubber hits the road. So I would suggest being clear about the dates when something is happening, how many people you project attending, again, numbers there, and specificity and timeline, because if the dates change, or the location changes in such a way that you're still engaging the same community you've identified, that's okay, right? Those are things that are subtle changes that don't violate the intention of the grant proposal. Hold on, put yourselves on mute if you can. Thank you, all right. Budget is clear, detailed, and accurate, and the applicant has thoroughly explained how they arrived at the numbers, indicating where risk of funds will be spent. Budget expenses and revenue are clearly related to the project description and the goals of the project, and are direct translation of stated goals into numbers. We have a how to do a project budget video that you will receive. It's a 3-minute video done by Jory Ketton. He's awesome. That you'll receive in a follow-up email that walks through how to make a project budget. What is proposed is achievable by the applicant on their own or in partnership with others. In the absence of past experience, information is provided to help make a convincing case the project will succeed. And lastly, I think the applicant has a clear and thorough sense of what success looks like for the project. An applicant shares clear, thorough, and achievable steps they will take to ensure this project's success. This is a question that trips a lot of people up, and I get it. And we'll look at it when we get to the application, but I'm gonna say this now because I might repeat it later, and it's still helpful to hear it twice, that the question that relates to defining success for a project, really picture what it means for your project to be successful, your program. And again, use numbers there where helpful, but you don't always have to. So think about what it would look like and think about how you would know you've gotten there. So if attendance is the thing, we want at least 100 people to attend. We'll know this from ticket sales or from doing a head count. We want people to have had a great experience. We will know this because we will do a survey, or we will talk to up to 10 people participating in the program to understand what their experience is. You don't need to get crazy and spend a lot of time and money, but these are public funds. It's important for the decision makers at B to understand that when you've gotten to the place you want to be. And it also gives the panel a sense of, okay, this person or this organization is thinking about how this project can move their work forward and move their community forward in a strategic way, right? Rather than just being like, I got a show, let's put on a barn. What would it mean for that show to be successful to you? And then how are you going to figure out that that's actually been the case? An applicant, oh yeah, I did that already. Great, perfect. Last one is not a part of the panel scoring that determines one's ranking. This is a 0 to 10 number. They're all 0 through 10 numbers, right? 10 being high, 0 being low, that a panelist comes up with. The first two criteria that I just shared with you determine their overall score that reflects rankings of applications. At the end of the panel day, they'll see a spreadsheet that has applications listed in descending order by score, high scoring applications at the top. And the column next to it will be the artistic vibrancy and intention score. This gives the panel to some more slight flexibility within constraints to consider things that are ranked very closely together and consider how they fund those things to the degree to which this score is high. So artistic vibrancy and intention. Does the project allow Rhode Island residents to actively participate in arts and culture with project leaders who have relevant experience in community being engaged? Does it provide an excellent and intentional experience for the participants? Are the project leaders, artists, or culture bearers involved? And they provide relevant and respectful engagement with the identified communities? Project leaders have substantial experience working with or are a part of an identified community they are engaging with? And does the project directly support the creation of art by, for, and with and of a specific community? One thing to know about these is some projects are going to do all these things. Some projects are going to just do one of these things or two of these things. It's fine, but this criteria reflects both priorities from our agency, from our strategic planning process, as well as priorities from the National Endowment for the Arts. So outside of something having robust community engagement value, clear feasibility and likelihood of success, this is kind of the icing on the cake, right? All right. Cool. So one moment, everyone. I'm going to pause the recording and see if you have any questions. You can unmute and ask them after I pause, or just put them in the chat. If you don't have any, it's also okay. All right. So what will happen when you want to apply? You'll want to go to the grants portal for this program. The way you find that is pretty easy. You go to our website, you go to grants, and you'll see that on the left-hand side of sidebar on the screen on the grants page, there'll be an online portal for our grants for organizations and a separate online portal for our grants for artists. You can also find it by just going to the Project Grants for Organizations page and click Start Application. If you don't have a profile already set up in the grant system, it is easy as pie to set one up, super simple. And then you'll see there's a variety of grant options available for you to apply for, and you'll just select, in this case, Project Grants for Organizations, or whatever other grant you want to apply for. Again, there's a lot of text in this grant application, which is consideration for when we use it again or make adjustments to it in the future to make it more streamlined. But the intention is for all the information you need to complete the application to be in the application, and explanations as to why we're asking the questions that we're asking. So the first, accordion in the application is application overview. And it goes over the fact that we have 3 sections to this application. There's the before you start the application eligibility quiz, so you know if your project is eligible for RISCA funding. There's the information for the panel, where you tell the panel of Rhode Island residents making funding recommendations for your grant program about your project. And then there's information for RISCA staff, where you'll share that information that RISCA is required to collect because of state and federal funding rules, all right? We make those distinctions because you don't need to worry so much about the information for RISCA staff. That panel does not see that. They don't look at it. If you make errors in that or you have questions or you get nervous, do your best and know that the one thing that we can allow after the grant deadline is that as long as you have information and all those things, I'll follow up and be like, hey, Joe, your 501c3 determination letter isn't the right letter. And there can be a back and forth there. We can't take a ton of time with that, but just know if you get crunched on the deadline and you're like, I can't find that thing, or, oh my God, is the 990 the right year? Just reach out to me, one, but B, just know I'll reach out to you if I notice those discrepancies. Again, they're not things that would invalidate your application totally. We just need them before we move the application to a panel. The next accordion is guidelines and template forms. This is where you'll see all the things that you can refer to in doing the application. One is the guidelines for the program, which I went over in the first part of this application walkthrough session. One is a project budget template that we'll look at in a little bit. One is the evaluation rubric that the panelists use. So I always recommend that you look at this before you start your application, and then you look at it at the end. You also could have a friend that is less familiar with the project read through your application with the rubric to give you a sense from an outsider's perspective if you're hitting all the marks there. These applications can be a lot. They ask a lot of questions and for a lot of information. These have actually been streamlined again since what we had in the past, but we're always thinking about how to streamline it more. One of the challenges with streamlining is other funders just have individual people making decisions, staff people, et cetera. We always have rotating panels of residents, of Rhode Island residents, and they're going to need more information always to make funding decisions. And that's a part of the democratic process here, right? That's what we have to ask for the amount of information that we do. And then the fiscal sponsor letter should you need it. Okay, the eligibility quiz is pretty straightforward. Is your organization a 501c3 nonprofit? If you say no, because you're using a fiscal sponsor, it's a branching question, and then you will answer questions about your fiscal sponsor. Occurring in an ADA compliant location with a link as to what that means. A question about that you're not using, your project is not any of the following things. So capital improvements, these grants can't support purchase of equipment. They also can't support anything capital related, bricks and mortar things. Can't be used for reducing debt for fundraising events. That's a no-no too, and that can be tricky for some organizations. It can't be used for prizes and awards. The money can't be used for prizes and awards. It can be used for stipends. If you have something where that's a component of your project, just talk to me about it, because there's a way to frame that in the right way. Can't be used for food and beverage. It's a general federal government thing. You can't re-grant the money to someone else. Again, you can pay someone for their time. You can give them a stipend or whatever you want to call it. Can't be for activities that are part of undergraduate or graduate degree programs, or an application that proselytizes or promotes religious activities. And again, performances and exhibitions that are not open to the general public or which are inaccessible to people with disabilities. All right, so let's assume you're all good to go on that. Great. Then the next accordion is where you introduce your project. Name of your group and what your mission is. Name for your project, and then project summary. I want you to note that the instructions in here are really important. The purpose of these questions is to briefly introduce your project. Your project name, project summary, and amount requested will be read aloud prior to discussing your application during panel meetings to reorient the panelists for your application. It will be used in public-facing material and records should your organization be awarded a grant. It is not unusual to spend more time than you think you should just on the project summary, because it is important. It is what reminds the panel what your project is. Panels are reviewing anywhere between 20 and 30 applications. If I get more than that in a given cycle, sometimes I get up to 70, then I have more than one panel. The project summary is the first thing they read to understand your project. It's the thing they refer back to. So think about the numbers person in there. So it's like, again, not just being like, we're doing a program that's arts and education related for our community because it's important. We're doing a program between January and May of 2024. That's 3 sessions for up to 60 participants. So again, be specific so they know what it is, all right? I have a lot of panels who run into challenges understanding what something is sometimes because of how it's written. And then the amount you're requesting. 1 second. Okay, Then there's this next, oh, I need to shift these, I think, a little. Information for risk of staff. These are just eligibility documents, termination letter, SAM-UEI, 990. All right, went over those before. Again, if you trip up on those, not the end of the world. Information for the panel. So these are the questions proper that you will answer. So first question, summarize your project as you're proposing it. Response length, notice the ideal response length between 2 and 4 paragraphs. I have people that write way too little, people will write way too much. That's like the Goldilocks range there, right? So I will just say if you're just writing a paragraph or a couple sentences, it's not enough, because look at those sub-questions and answer them in that order. What you're doing, when and where the project is happening, who is involved with the project, just identify them. You'll describe more about them later, and what the intent or inspiration for the project is. Again, think about that head, heart, numbers, person, right? People, I should say. Your community. Who comprises the community being engaged with by the project, and why is this project relevant and meaningful to them? Again, look at those sub-questions and answer those. If relevant, please share how you'll be working with the community to carry out the project. Be sure to include relevant demographics and geography of your identified communities. That might not be possible for some projects, but again, you want to orient the panel to where you're doing the work that you're doing and who is in the community that you're doing this project within. That link links you to the census page and how to access information there, as well as something called the United States zip codes, which can also give you demographic information. You can also discuss your community in other ways, certainly. Just be sure to be clear how you know your community is, what it is. And whatever you do not say that this project's for everyone, because nothing is for everyone, all right? You have to be more specific than that. Community support materials. So again, this is where you submit things, speaking of that head, heart, and numbers person, about how a community thinks their project is meaningful. Spoke about that before. You can submit up to 4. Think about the fact that panelists are reading between, like I said, 20 and 30 applications. So you won't want to submit a support material that's many, many pages long. Limit your support materials, I recommend, if they're written things or just documents, to 2 to 3 pages. If you're submitting images, you can do like a little PDF with all the images together, or you can just do single images. If you're doing a video, about 3 to 5 minutes is the ideal length. That doesn't mean you need to edit a video down, but you can just indicate time points if you have something on YouTube or whatever, or Vimeo. And again, also, panelists are reviewing these things in the grant system at home before they meet together for a full day to discuss things on Zoom. So you want to upload whatever your video or audio is to a third-party website. You can just drop the link in there as a description. Your people. So this is where you tell the panel, the people involved with the project, and why they're best suited. Again, sub-questions there that are important. Describe any other key partners who will assist in the project. If there are many artists involved, which sometimes happens, focus on no more than 5. If you don't have your artist selected yet, you can discuss artists you've worked with in the past or for similar programs, or what type of artists you intend to work with. If you're going to do a call for artists as part of this project, you could have and include a draft call. The panel just wants to understand how and who you're considering for your project. Again, ideal response length there is 2 to 3 paragraphs. If you're writing just a few sentences, it's too short. If you're writing more than 3 paragraphs, way too long, all right? They're not gonna be able to ingest it. Or the worst thing that happens when things are too long is a panel just can't sort it out in their minds and remember. Your people support materials, again, this is where you just have materials that speak to the experience of the individuals involved. Can be videos, images, CV, resume, etc. I'm back here. Second, everyone. All right. The defining your success question. Remember this one, I referred to this before. Describe what a successful project looks like to you and how you will measure it. Consider things beyond numbers of attendees and post-event surveys. Keep in mind that we do not expect you to spend a large amount of time and funds on evaluation. We recommend thinking about what success looks like for you and then figuring out what things you would observe or measure that will indicate you achieved that. Remember I said, it says consider things beyond numbers because people get stopped at numbers, but attendance can be one easy thing if that's a measure of success for you with something you're doing. If it's about someone's experience of something being whatever, joyful, educational, how are you going to know that? You know, are you just going to have some informal conversations? Are you going to do follow-up calls? Are you going to do a survey? Whatever, just whatever reasonable thing that you're going to do. Typically, you just think about how one determines if something is successful is usually just through observation, through conversation, or some kind of more formal data collection, right? Providing access, remember this, I brought it up before. Beyond your programming occurring in an ADA compliant space, tell us 3 ways your project will be accessible and inclusive and reduce barriers to those who, to access for those who want to attend your project. What are you doing in respect to your project to reach out and engage with all people within your identified community? We want to know how you're planning to engage people from different cultural backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses, and physical and mental abilities. Again, think beyond being in an ADA compliant space. Don't even mention that because that is also something you already checked the box for, right? So the cost of something, if it's on a transit line, like I mentioned, if you're thinking about people of a more modest socioeconomic means or people who are low income, if you're trying to engage with different communities that you don't have a current relationship with, or maybe partnering with other organizations that do, or with trusted people within those communities to engage them. Are you having, and this, again, this is not a requirement, and it's not, it would be inauthentic to do it if you didn't have people who are blind or low vision. If you have people who are deaf in your audience or deaf people, are you having an ASL interpreter? Are you having things in Braille, etc. There's those means as well. So just kind of broaden your conception and really think about how with things that you can, it's only 3 things for a reason. We understand limited funds, limited means, and everyone needs to stretch their access muscles. So what are things that you're going to do with this given project? Providing a timeline for the project. So this is where you'll show all the major steps involved, when they're happening, and who is doing them. This might just be a month. It might be several months. This can be a simple bulleted list. Please click on that link and look at how the format for that list is helpful. You can simply copy that format. It's nothing too complicated. I don't want to mess up the screen sharing by opening it here, but just know it's very straightforward. Project budget we'll look at in a minute. And again, there's a video that can support you in completing that. So you'll identify your expenses and other income sources you have for a project outside the risk of grant, including the risk of grant. You don't have to have other income sources, it's fine. And then question 10, list which eligible expenses you'll apply your risk of grant to. Your response, this is one of the ones that can be really short. This is just an eligibility question where we're just looking to be like, okay, they're not spending the money on a fundraiser, they're not spending it on food, great. Panelists typically, and it aligns with agency values, really like to see people paid for their time. So if you have a project that's budgeted more than $3,000 or under $3,000 or whatever, if you're prioritizing how to use a risk of funds, use it to pay people, and that usually is something that flies with panelists because of our agency values. And that artwork is work. The list goes over what RISCA doesn't fund. Again, this is another question. Many organizations receive donated items, services, or space from community members in support of a project. These are called in-kind donations. They're coming from people in the community. It's not someone at an organization. It's not board members donating their time. They're a part of the organization or a part of the project. So if you have someone in the community who's a graphic designer donating their time, that's an in-kind donation. If you have a business who's donating food, that's wonderful to communicate. The only thing is we can't use risk of funds for food, but if you're getting food donated, great. Again, this just shows the panel that you have a community excited about what you're doing, wanting to support it. And there's an example response link there. The remaining questions, breathe a sigh of relief, are just for RISCA staff. We're obligated to ask you which district, congressional district, your project is occurring in, because we notify the congressional districts of what projects are being funded by NEA supported funds in their districts. And then there's these drop-down menu questions. You just need to answer these to the best of your ability. These are questions we're required to ask for federal and state reporting. Don't get too stressed out about them. Make your best guess. These are things that I always check, and I'll adjust based on my knowledge of what is the correct definition for each thing. So applicant status, institution, discipline. So just to show you what these look like, you know, what's the legal status of your organization? What kind of institution are you? Many folks are 99, none of the above, okay? And that's okay. If you're really not sure, just use that one, it's fine. Applicant discipline, these are just the disciplines that the NEA dictates that we use. So they're not as detailed as they could be, certainly. Project discipline, not dissimilar type of activity, you know, a award, fellowship, exhibition, fair festival, et cetera, et cetera. Some of these things you'll note, you're like, wait a minute, we can't use this grant for facility construction and maintenance. You are correct. Don't choose that one. You'll know because you know your project can't do those kinds of things, that that's not something you can select. It's just the national standard data fields we're required to have in there as options. And then arts education, some projects have it, some projects don't. Again, this isn't a criteria for evaluation. This is just the NEA tracking the project its funding is being used to support. And then assurances, and you're good to go. So I'm going to show you all two more things, and then I'll have whatever time left for questions. If you don't have any questions, we'll just go on our merry way. I wanted to show you first the rubric. This is the evaluation rubric that panelists use. You can see it's a total score of 20 with 10 additional points that come into play in panel discussion. Remember, there's 5 panelists, right? So we intentionally have it calibrated so their maximum score possible each is 20, because then it makes the total score they see for a project be, you know, on kind of that typical school grade scale, like 100 being perfect, 90 being pretty good. And that just kind of is something that easily translates for people. So you can see, I'll just point out one of these and then talk about artistic vibrancy and intention. Community impact and engagement. Is there evidence that this arts and culture project meaningfully engages and inspires its community while expanding opportunities and access for Rhode Island residents? And you see there are 5 sub-criteria there that are the things you saw in the evaluation criteria before, right? Identify community, do they understand who they are? Relevance to community, has a direct and deep relevance, opportunities to participate, etc. And you can see the 1 through 10 score, 1 is low, 10 is high, and they're giving a score based on the degree to which the project shows evidence of community impact and engagement across all the criteria, all right? Same with feasibility and likelihood of success. 1 through 10, 10 being, you know, maximum, tons of evidence there. Between 1 and 10, the degree which they feel is adequate, more than adequate, less adequate, etc. And again, artistic vibrancy and intention, this is that score that comes into play in panel conversations. The other 2 scores reflect ranking, right? Again, to the degree to which something hits some of those criteria, all those criteria, etc. And that'll help with tie breaking when things score close together, or when panels are like, this thing scored lightly lower than that, but you know what, it really hits all 3 of those important artistic vibrancy and intention criteria. Let's go ahead and elevate it and give it a grant award. Last thing I'll show you, I'm not going to go in super in depth on this, is the project budget, because you're going to get a video that walks through it. Hold on. All right. Budget has 2 components to it, an income side, right? Including you put in the risk of request amounts, and an expense side. And you can see when you're doing the income side, remember you're doing this project in the future. So you're going to project income sources. So if you're doing a performance for the first time in a community, you haven't done it before, but you've done performances in the past, you're going to just make your best guess as to how much money you'd make in ticket sales, right? And maybe that's your admittance box office there. If you apply for a grant from, you know, Rhode Island Foundation, the Department of Art, Culture, and Tourism at the City of Providence, you can indicate that here, that amount that you've asked, and you can see there you're going to mark confirmed items with an asterisk. So if it's a request you put in and haven't received and haven't been told that you got the grant, don't put an asterisk, but put an asterisk by those things that you have heard confirmation from, because that'll let the panel know, like, okay, cool, they have a funding source already attributed to this, that speaks to like it's kind of enhances feasibility, right? One thing I'll point out, cash on hand, if you have cash in the bank account from another project you've done where you made some income, you can use that money towards your project. That's totally fine. The thing to know, and the video goes over this, that in the case of project grant budgets, you want to make it balanced, meaning you want an equal amount of income and an equal amount of expense. Remember, this project is happening in the future. Just assume a future reality where you break even, right? That might not be the case. You might make a little money, you might lose a little money, but just assume it's break even. That's helpful kind of leveling field for a panel. Expenses, big things to know. There's eligible expenses and ineligible expenses, things that risk of funds can't be applied to. You're going to let us know about all of them. And remember that narrative question where you just indicate where you'll use what line items in your expenses, in the expense side of your budget, you're going to use those funds for. And again, I recommend, based on what panelists like, paying people first. That tends to be what they like to see. You can absolutely use it for all those eligible expenses listed there. Please do. But just know that if you have a variety of options in terms of what you put it towards, choose people first. All right, everyone. That concludes this part of the workshop. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn off the recording, and I'll answer any additional questions you have. Hold on, everyone. And for those watching the recording, I hope you enjoy it.